My name's Cecelia Wager. I'm a sophomore taking honors chemistry, and for this year's science fair project, I decided to create an improved shipping container for COVID vaccine vials. For this project, there are many steps involved, but the first few were to create an outline describing my thesis, research most everything that I would need to create a shipment container, and finally collect my materials. When I was first tasked with coming up with ideas for this year's science fair, it was around the time that news came out about trucks being caught in the heat and all the vaccines going bad because of it. So I started talking with my dad about how I could improve the existing container, but I realized that would be hard with my accessible materials and budget. So I shifted my thinking to create a cold shipping container for COVID vaccines that is eco-friendly. It has been important to me from a young age to not pollute the earth, so I decided that I would create a container that uses recyclable and reusable materials that keeps the samples fresh longer than one solely made from styrofoam. The second thing I did was research my topic. I created a list of questions and answered them one by one. The reason why it's so important to keep the COVID vaccine cold is because of the mRNA molecule inside the vaccine. Even a minor integration reaction anywhere along the mRNA strands can severely stop or slow proper translation performance of that strand. The current system for the vaccine storage includes many elements. The vaccine must be kept at -70°C, and Pfizer has a container that can last 5 days without the dry ice being replaced, but they use materials that are not reusable. The area that I found to be the most important when building a storage container was the insulation. When I was researching, I learned about the R rating system for insulation, and I researched the different eco-friendly insulations. When looking at eco-friendly materials, there are many easily renewable insulators that have a high R value. Looking at just a few reviews, I am choosing recycled cloth, cardboard, tissue paper, a Yeti cooler, and styrofoam to be my baseline or control group that I will try to beat. There are many techniques that I will implement when creating the container. Having the most accurate temperature possible is really important when conducting an experiment. Also, having a model that is very basic yet not reusable is important to show how effective reusable materials can be. The next thing that I had to do was acquire my materials. I got recycled cloth mixture, styrofoam, dry ice, a Yeti cooler, scissors, safety goggles, safety gloves, a thermometer, an analytical balance scale, tissue paper, cardboard tubes with caps, and a cardboard box. The first model that I created was a baseline that I was trying to beat. I had a closed styrofoam container with 500 grams of ice and the thermometer acting as the COVID samples in the center. I closed the container and let it sit at room temperature for the experiment. This graph matches the data that the thermometer sent to my phone. As you can see, at the beginning, it recorded that almost immediately the temperature went down to almost -90°C. Then it didn't stay there long because the styrofoam didn't work too well, and it came back up to room temperature. The second model that I created was my first prototype. It was made of 24 tubes, lightly stuffed with tissue paper in a box where the thermometer was in the center and the dry ice was stuffed above the 4 surrounding tubes. I closed the box and let it sit at room temperature for the experiment. This is the graph that matches the data that the thermometer sent to my phone. As you can see, the temperature went down slower than the first model, which is good because it stayed down below -70°C longer, but when the temperature started to increase, it was at a super accelerated rate. The third and final model that I created had many layers. I first took 500 grams of dry ice and stuffed it into 10 small closed tubes. Then I layered the reused cloth mixture on the bottom of the Yeti, placed a thermometer on it, and then the dry ice tubes, and finally another layer of cloth mixture. I sealed the cooler and let it sit at room temperature for the remainder of the experiment. This graph matches the data that the thermometer sent to my phone. As you can see, this one by far did the best out of any of them. The temperature went down and stayed down for around 6.5 hours, which is more than Model 1's 4 hours and Model 2's 3 hours. In all, based on my data, the best reusable/recyclable model is the final model. The sample stayed the coldest and longest was the record time of about 6 hours. This was by far longer than experiment number 2, which only lasted about 5 hours. I had successfully made a recyclable cold shipment container that was better than my first. My final model even built the styrofoam container because that one only lasted around 4 hours. The reason why my third model was the best was because of the many layers of insulation. Although my model worked exactly how it should have, there were some sources of disappointment. First off, because I didn't want to spend a crazy amount of money on my experiment, I didn't have access to loads of dry ice. It also supplemented really quickly because I don't have a freezer that goes that low. This meant that I had to proportion out my dry ice to account for the loss that I would have after sitting in my freezer for a few days. In all, it was disappointing that I couldn't make my experience last longer. On the other hand, my data was fairly accurate and proportionate. If I could change anything, it would be to get more than one thermometer. If I had more than one, I could conduct multiple experiments at once, which would allow me to use more dry ice. I would also get a thermometer that went lower than -37 degrees Celsius so that my data could be more accurate. One extension that I would add would be to see how much the dry ice affected it, because my amount was always fixed. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.